My name is Jake Morrison, and until 3 months ago I was just another marine biologist from Miami, working at the Seaquarium. My life completely changed when I received an unexpected invitation to join a scientific expedition in the Amazon. The project was funded by National Geographic, and they were looking for American specialists to document wildlife in the most remote region of Peru. I had never left the United States before. I was born and raised in Florida, where the most dangerous snakes I encountered were Burmese pythons that had escaped from irresponsible owners. But when they showed me early photos of what could be giant anacondas, larger than anything ever documented, I couldn't say no. The flight from Miami to Lima was the longest of my life, 13 hours of wondering what awaited me. I had read every scientific report available about anacondas, but nothing prepared me for what was coming. During the flight, I went over the notes I'd taken. Green anacondas can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh up to 440 pounds. Impressive numbers, but I would soon find out they were far from the truth. In Lima, I met the rest of the team. 2 cameramen from Los Angeles, a local Peruvian guide named Fernando, and Dr. Sarah Chen, a herpetologist from Berkeley who had studied snakes in Australia. Sarah told me about reports from local indigenous communities. They spoke of a creature they called Yakumama, the mother of the waters, a snake so massive it could swallow a full-grown man whole. At first, I thought these were just exaggerated legends. As an American, I was used to scientific precision, exact measurements and hard evidence. But when we arrived at the small airport in Iquitos, deep in the Peruvian Amazon, Fernando showed us some photos on his phone, blurry images taken from a distance, but showing something that challenged everything I knew about snakes. That first night in Iquitos was unsettling. The hotel was basic, a far cry from the Miami beach resorts where I used to spend my weekends. The jungle noise was deafening, crickets, frogs, bats, and other sounds I couldn't identify. I tried to call my wife Jennifer back in Orlando, but the signal was weak. I managed to send a quick message. We arrived safely. Heading into the jungle tomorrow, love you. The next morning, we loaded our gear into a small motorboat. Fernando had brought special capture equipment, ropes, nets, and something he called a containment tube, a metal cylinder that could restrain a large snake's head. I asked what size of snake it was for, and he just smiled and said, "You'll understand when we see it." We traveled upriver on the Amazon for hours. The scenery was hypnotic, an endless green wall on both sides of the river, with occasional clearings where we could see small riverside communities. The houses were simple, made of wood, raised on stilts. Children waved at our boat, and I waved back, thinking about how different their lives were from my busy routine in Miami. Fernando told us we were heading to a region called Bamenyo, territory of the Huarani people. Few outsiders had ever been there, and getting permission to enter had taken months of negotiation. The Huarani have known these waters for generations, Fernando explained. They know where the anacondas hide. Without them, you'd never find what you're looking for. When we stopped for lunch on a small sandy beach, Sarah showed me her sample collection gear, syringes, test tubes, and a small GPS device to mark exact locations. If we find something truly massive, she said, we need to document everything scientifically. We can't just film it and walk away. The second day of the expedition began before dawn. Fernando woke us at 4:30 a.m., whispering that this was the best time to find active anacondas. Still half asleep, I put on my field gear and ate the basic breakfast he had prepared: eggs, tropical fruit, and a strong coffee that woke me up instantly. When we boarded the small motorboat, the Amazonian darkness felt almost tangible. The only lights were our flashlight and the stars still glowing in the sky. The river was calm like a mirror, perfectly reflecting our beam. For the first 20 minutes, the only sounds were the soft hum of the motor and the occasional distant cries of howler monkeys. Suddenly, Fernando cut the engine and pointed to the left bank of the river. "Look over there," he murmured. At first, I saw nothing but dense vegetation. Then Sarah turned on her high-powered flashlight, and I saw it, a long brownish-green shape resting on the muddy shore. My heart raced. It was an anaconda, though I couldn't judge its size from a distance. We approached slowly, with Fernando rowing silently. As we got closer, I realized this snake was far bigger than anything I'd seen in herpetology books. Its body was as thick as the trunk of a small tree, stretching across the bank for what seemed like an impossible distance. "My God," Sarah whispered beside me. "It must be at least 26 feet long." Fernando shook his head. "That's not her," he said. "This one's small compared to the one the Huarani showed me." Small? That creature was bigger than any anaconda ever scientifically documented in the US. But Fernando was right. We were just at the beginning of our journey. We took some photos and water samples from the site, marked the GPS coordinates, and continued upriver. 2 hours later, we arrived at the Huarani community. The contrast with my life in Miami was jarring. About 30 people lived in simple wooden homes with palm-thatched roofs, no electricity, no plumbing. But there was a dignity and wisdom in their eyes that struck me immediately. The chief, an elderly man named Tyrona, greeted us with a seriousness that made it clear we weren't just on a scientific mission, we were entering sacred ground. Fernando translated his words. He says the Yakumama is restless. She has been appearing more frequently in recent weeks. Tyrona led us to a small lagoon behind the village. The water was dark as black coffee, and I could see the occasional bubbles rising to the surface. "She lives here," Fernando translated, "but she only shows herself when she chooses." With the Huarani's permission, we set up our camp by the edge of the lagoon. Sarah installed motion-activated cameras around the water, while I prepped the sample collection equipment. The cameramen from LA, Mark and Tom, set up their professional gear at strategic angles. That first night was frustrating. We heard movement in the water several times, but whenever we turned on our flashlights, there was nothing to see. Around 3 a.m., one of the motion sensors went off. Mark rushed to check, but when we reviewed the footage, it showed only ripples on the water's surface. "She's testing us," Tyrona said through Fernando. "The Yakumama is intelligent. She knows you're here." On the third day, I decided to try a different approach. As a marine biologist, I was used to being patient with aquatic creatures. Instead of using intrusive tech, I simply sat by the edge of the lagoon at sunrise, alone, without cameras or noisy equipment. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink when I felt the water move. At first, just small ripples, but they gradually became more pronounced. My heart started to race as I saw a dark shape nearing the surface. And then I saw her. Her head emerged from the dark water, a head the size of a medium dog, with piercing yellow eyes that seemed to be studying me. For a moment that felt eternal, the creature and I locked eyes. It wasn't aggressive, just curious. Slowly, more of her body surfaced. First the neck, thick as my thigh, then the first few meters of her massive form. I made a quick estimate. Just what was visible already measured at least 13 feet, but that was only the beginning. The snake kept emerging, and I realized I was witnessing something that defied everything science knew about anacondas. Her body seemed endless, rising from the dark water like a giant underwater cable. 6 meters, 7, 8, and she kept coming. I tried to remain perfectly still, though my breathing was rapid. Back in Florida, I had swum with bull sharks, handled giant rays, but nothing had prepared me for being just 10 feet away from a snake that clearly measured over 30 feet in length. When she finally stopped rising, I estimated at least 40 feet of her body was visible. Her eyes stayed fixed on me, and I could see her forked tongue flicking in and out, tasting my scent in the air. That was the moment I understood why the Huarani called her Mother of the Waters. She wasn't just a snake. She was a presence, a force of nature that demanded respect and reverence. The serpent remained still for nearly 10 minutes, watching me with those hypnotic yellow eyes. I managed to control my breathing and stayed completely motionless, knowing that any sudden movement could either scare her off or worse, provoke her. During that time, I was able to study every detail of her extraordinary anatomy. Her head was proportionally small compared to her massive body, but still the size of a medium dog. The muscles in her neck subtly contracted and relaxed as she processed my presence. Her scales were a mosaic of deep green and brown, with patterns that looked as if they'd been painted by an artist, each mark unique and intricate. What struck me most was her apparent intelligence. She wasn't just a primitive predator driven by instinct. There was something almost contemplative in her behavior. She was studying me just as I was studying her, weighing whether I was a threat or simply a curiosity. Slowly, I began to move. First, just my fingers, then my right hand, gently reaching for the small audio recorder in my pocket. I wanted to document the moment, not just for the expedition, but for myself. I knew that once I returned to Miami, people would doubt everything I said. Day 3, 6:47 a.m., I whispered into the recorder, barely moving my lips. I'm approximately 3 meters from an anaconda, I estimate to be between 40 and 50 feet long. Her behavior is completely different from what we expected. She shows no aggression, only curiosity. The snake tilted her head slightly at the sound of my voice, as if trying to understand where the noise came from. Her forked tongue flicked in and out several times, collecting chemical information about me. I could feel that she was tasting my scent in the air. That's when I noticed something that would completely change my understanding of these creatures. In the water behind her, I saw movement. At first I thought it was just the current, but soon it became clear that another anaconda was approaching. Then another, and another. Within minutes, there were at least 6 anacondas of various sizes in the lagoon. The largest, the one who had surfaced first, seemed to be the matriarch of the group. The others were smaller but still impressive, measuring between 20 and 33 feet each. I had never read anything about anacondas forming groups. Every study I knew described them as solitary, except during mating season. But there I was, witnessing something that defied established scientific knowledge. Sarah appeared silently beside me. She had come looking for me when she realized I hadn't returned to camp. When she saw what I was seeing, her eyes widened and she immediately began taking photos with a special camera, set to shoot without flash. "Jake," she whispered, This is impossible. Anacondas don't form groups." "I know," I murmured back, "but we're seeing it with our own eyes." The snakes appeared to be performing some sort of ritual or social behavior. The matriarch stayed in the center, while the others moved in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. Occasionally, one of the smaller snakes would approach the larger one, lightly touching her head, as if asking permission or showing respect. Tyrona appeared on the opposite bank of the lagoon, accompanied by Fernando. When the chief saw what was happening, his expression changed completely. He began speaking rapidly in his native language, gesturing toward the snakes. "What's he saying?" I asked Fernando. "He says he's never seen this before," Fernando translated, awe in his voice. "He says the Yakumama is introducing her family to you. It's a great honor." The anaconda's behavior continued for over an hour. They moved gracefully through the water, sometimes diving completely, then re-emerging in new formations. The matriarch remained visible the entire time, as if supervising the entire display. Mark and Tom arrived with their filming equipment, but Fernando stopped them before they got too close. "Not now," he said. "They're comfortable with us, but more people might scare them off." During that time, I made detailed observations of the snake's behavior. They were clearly communicating through subtle body movements. When one moved in a specific way, the others responded accordingly. It was like watching a silent conversation between creatures science was only beginning to understand. Around 10 a.m., the anacondas began to disperse. One by one, they dove and vanished into the dark depths of the lagoon. The matriarch was the last to leave. She looked at me one final time as if committing my face to memory, and then silently slid beneath the surface. I remained seated at the edge of the lagoon for a few more minutes, trying to process what I had just witnessed. As a biologist, I knew I had observed something extraordinary, a behavior never before documented. But as a human being, I felt like I had been touched by something almost spiritual. Sarah came over and sat beside me. "Jake, do you realize what we just saw?" "Yes," I replied, still gazing at the calm water. "This is going to change everything we know about anacondas." "Not just that," she continued. "If we can document this properly, it could revolutionize our understanding of intelligence and social behavior in large snakes." Tyrona called us over, and through Fernando, explained that we needed to leave soon. "He says the anacondas now know you're here," Fernando translated. "They might appear again, but it won't be the same. This was a special encounter. As we packed our equipment, I couldn't stop thinking about the look in the matriarch's eyes. There was something almost human in them, an intelligence that made me question everything I thought I knew about these animals. 3 weeks had passed since our return to the United States, and I still hadn't fully processed what we experienced in the Amazon. Back in my lab in Miami, I tried to analyze the samples Sarah had collected, but my mind kept drifting back to the matriarch's hypnotic yellow eyes. The photos we took caused a stir in the scientific community. Dr. Michael Harrison, my supervisor at the Seaquarium, initially questioned the authenticity of the images. "Jake, are you sure there wasn't any digital manipulation? These proportions are impossible." But Sarah had been meticulous. Each photo came with precise GPS data, reference measurements using known objects, and DNA analyses from the water samples we collected. The genetic test results confirmed not only the presence of anacondas, but revealed something even more extraordinary. "Jake, you need to see this," Sarah called me one morning, her voice trembling with excitement. "The DNA samples show that these anacondas are genetically distinct from any others ever catalogued. We're talking about a possible new species." I flew to Berkeley that same day to see the results firsthand. In Sarah's lab, she showed me the comparative analyses. The genetic markers of the anacondas we encountered differed significantly from known anacondas, not just in size, but in fundamental genetic structure. "That would explain the social behavior we observed," she said, pointing to complex charts on her computer screen. "If they're a different species, then everything we know about solitary anaconda behavior may not apply to them." We knew we had to return, but this time with a full scientific team. We secured funding from the National Science Foundation and the Smithsonian Institution. The second expedition would include 12 researchers, geneticists, animal behaviorists, and herpetology experts from universities in Texas, California, and Florida. When we returned to Huaorani territory 2 months later, Tyrona greeted us with a grave expression. Through Fernando, he explained that the anacondas had changed their behavior since our last visit. "They're more cautious," Fernando translated. "Some have been seen in deeper waters far from the usual lagoon." The expanded team set up a full scientific camp on the lagoon's edge. We had sonar equipment to map the bottom, underwater cameras, and 24-hour monitoring systems. Dr. Patricia Martinez, our animal behavior specialist from UC San Diego, was particularly intrigued by our reports of social behavior. "In 20 years of studying large constrictors," she told me, "I've never seen evidence of structured group behavior. If we can document this properly, it will be groundbreaking." During the first week, we captured only occasional movement on the underwater cameras. The anacondas clearly knew we were there, but kept their distance. It wasn't until I decided to repeat my original approach, sitting alone by the water at dawn, that we had another meaningful encounter. On the morning of the 8th day, she appeared again, the matriarch. I recognized her immediately by her unique scale patterns and those piercing yellow eyes. But this time she wasn't alone. 2 smaller anacondas accompanied her, one on each side. What followed was even more extraordinary than our first encounter. For nearly an hour, the 3 snakes performed what I can only describe as a presentation. They moved in synchronized formations, with the matriarch clearly leading the others' movements. Dr. Martinez, watching through binoculars from a safe distance, documented behaviors that challenged decades of established research. "They're communicating," she whispered over the radio. "I see clear signs of hierarchy, leadership, and coordinated response." When the anacondas finally withdrew, the matriarch did something that deeply moved me. She approached the shore where I was sitting, partially emerged from the water, and remained still for several minutes, staring directly at me. There was no aggression or fear, just a deep, ancient intelligence, as if she were assessing my intentions. Then, slowly, she turned and slipped back into the dark depths of the lagoon. I knew instinctively that this had been our farewell. Our findings were published 6 months later in the Journal of Herpetology and in National Geographic. The scientific paper sparked intense debate in the academic community, but the evidence was undeniable. We had documented not only anacondas of extraordinary size, but also complex social behavior never before observed in the species. Today, a year later, I still receive invitations to speak at universities around the world. But whenever I tell this story, I always end the same way. There are mysteries in nature that science is only beginning to understand, and sometimes, if we're lucky enough, we're allowed to witness those mysteries firsthand. The giant Amazonian snake is real. I saw her, and she saw me too.